Hey, I know we got a busy day city-wise. We got this, of course, and then the big skate park opening at 3 o'clock today. And we have all of the information up. I know all the rules are up, and I would say our media partners can certainly help us out by getting those rules out there. There's some, you can use skateboards, but bikes, not so much. So some of those things out there that are going to be a little ambiguous for the first time we've had a skate park this expansive, and I'd tell you, that's I think the first thing certainly my first impression when I went out there is just how big this park is and how involved and detailed it is. I mean, it's really something to see. So getting those, I know we've sent those out, and we'll get copies to you if you need them. But make sure we share with the citizens of the community what those rules are, so we don't want anybody to be disappointed when they get there, or at least do the best we can. I'll go through a few updates here. We've got the state budget was released this morning, and we were certainly glad to see two line items, most importantly, which was $750,000 for the Veterans Memorial Park bathrooms is in the state budget, as well as $850,000 for the Escambia County gun violence. That's our partnership with the Sheriff's Department in terms of some gunshot recognition technology. And so that's in the budget for $850,000. So that's great news. Obviously, that's contingent on this budget being signed by the governor, and as is normal, as we do every year, he's going to have the opportunity to look at that and make some line items if he so chooses. But good news, we've made the first step on two important projects here for the city. So just got that update this morning. Hawkshaw Memorial, I'm going to give an update on that. I know there was some publicity around the condition of the structure itself for the memorial. We have seen that. Coincidentally, we were actually already in process probably maybe about a week before that, maybe a little less. We had started the process of some cleanup. I had seen some additional issues that had been passed on to me about the condition, really less about the structure itself and more around the structure and down in that area where you couldn't see. Really, and how much trash had been collected, that there had been some damage underneath the statue down at the end of the memorial. There was someone had popped the gate off of that, and there were people inhabiting that at least regularly, based on the trash and all the stuff that was underneath the structure. So once we became aware of that, we moved into coming up with a process. We had our team, Public Works, Parks and Rec, Neighborhood Services, all met out there, I believe, last Tuesday morning, and to assess the situation, figure out what we needed to do to get that back to where it needs to be. So we received that assessment back. We think the cost is going to be about $30,000 between all of the cleanup, as well as the cutting back of the phragmites and some of that the foliage there that doesn't allow us to be able to see that area and make sure. We certainly don't want to put ourselves in a position to spend that kind of money and then not be able to patrol and maintain that it's staying clean. We're keeping all that litter out of Pensacola Bay. So about half of that cost is the cleanup, and about half of that cost is actually the cutting back of mainly the phragmites that are there. If you look at our spend prior to this, there was a big bump in maintenance costs, about $25,000 spent in 2019. That was to cut back, and so we have not done that since then. So we are going to take that on. More to come. I'll get you an exact date of when that should be completed, but my understanding is that should be completed before Memorial Day is the plan for now. Obviously, we got Veterans Park across the street, and we want to make sure that is up and going, as well as what our plan is to make sure that we are keeping eyes on that area. We haven't really owned a process or procedure of making sure that area is being looked at, whether that's police, whether that's neighborhood services, whether that's partners, in our homeless reduction community that are trying to get people into services. Whatever the case may be, those are all things that we didn't have consistency on, and that we, after this kind of spend, we're going to certainly have consistency on moving forward. So, as I said, everything will be cleaned and cleared, and then we'll have our plan moving forward to make sure that when the city and the taxpayer makes an investment like that we actually have a procedure in place to maintain it as best we can. So we haven't necessarily addressed some of the issues specifically with the top of the structure, the walkway, all of those things. That this was, again, something coincidentally already in process, was really more focused around the surrounding area. So that we're going to take that on first. But, look, just my opinion on this goes back to a foundational issue that the city has run into in years past, which is taking on the maintenance of things. And if you look back, this is I don't want to say, I believe, if I remember correct, I was at this, at the dedication of this as a kid, and if I remember correctly. But so it has been around a long time. When we had this agreement in 2000, the lessee was in charge, and there was a very minimal $1 a year kind of payment, $20 a year, something like that. They were in charge of maintenance, and then in 2008 we amended that to say that the city was in charge of maintenance on this. And we haven't done a good enough job of that, but I think, as I said, this is really a foundational issue about that we're going to really revamp policies when it comes to naming things, when it comes to taking on maintenance of things that other folks want to do. Yes, of course, the city does that, and I'm not saying that isn't something we're going to entertain, but we're going to have a more formal procedure in how that happens. Because when we sign on to maintain something, we're signing the taxpayer on to maintain something. And so when we look at, we've got plenty of things to maintain on our own, 94 parks, 10 community centers. And so it says nothing about the memorial itself and its importance. Completely aside from that, I think this is just a good example that illustrates the point that we have to be very mindful as the city about the maintenance and the projects that we take on, and know that there's a cost. There's a cost in perpetuity to taking these things on. So between how we name things and how we and what we choose to take on in terms of maintenance, that's something that in this administration that we're going to get cleaned up and work on, and we'll get back to you on that plan. Other planning that we owe you information to get back to you on is on May 22nd. We're going to roll out two things. One is our first city quality of life metrics that we're going to use. We'll come up with a word there's a lot of dashboards out there, so we'll come up with a synonym. But ultimately, it'll be a first phase. It won't be every single thing that we measure. If you looked at the mayoral transition report, there's a lot of data in there. We don't want to overwhelm everybody, and we don't want to overwhelm how many things we're tracking. The goal of tracking things is so you can see what's happening and then make changes. You start tracking too many things at one time, then you're tracking them, but you're not in a position to be able to react to what you're tracking. So we're going to start with a phase one approach, kind of the 40,000 foot view of metrics that say, hey, these are metrics that we believe measure the quality of life for Pensacola citizens. So we'll start with that. And then also at the same time on May 22nd, we're going to give you a progress report on the mayoral transition team. And what that will include is everything that has already been done, the things that are in progress, and then the things moving forward. I would say I don't want to put a number on it, our top 8, our top 10, top 12 kind of priorities that have not, that are not in progress yet, that we're going to get to next ultimately. So we'll see what that exact number is, but that's how we'll identify it. And one of the things as we've gone through this in our office is there's really 2 buckets of recommendations out of a mayoral transition report. One is what I call an aspirational, and that doesn't mean it's unrealistic. It just might say, improve access to healthcare, or it might be something that's very generic that you can't really say has been completed. So there are recommendations in the report that are much more clear cut, black and white. Did you do this, yes or no? So we're going to outline both of those categories and say, hey, here are the recommendations from the transition report that are more mission driven, that are more aspirational for the city, to say that we can never truly say the job is done, but that we're mindful of. That's one. And then the other will be the much more clear cut, nuts and bolts, do this, accomplish this task, hire this person, or create this job, that kind of thing. We'll outline all of that for you, and both of those things will be to you on May 22nd, which is 6 months to the day of the start of this administration. Mentioned the skate park today at 3 o'clock. Again, expected a big crowd and excited to see all the enthusiasm and get the kids out there on that park. We have a Summit Boulevard lane repurposing feasibility workshop on May 16th. So what that is, to be clear, is we have not committed. There are no dollars at this point that are attributed to any kind of change with Summit at this point. However, a feasibility study had taken place. So I don't like doing studies that we don't necessarily have any feedback with or don't do anything with. So our goal with that is to outreach to the community right in and around Summit Boulevard and say, hey, here's kind of what we learned, and tell us what you think. What are your concerns? So I want to temper expectations that this isn't a meeting because we're about to go do something on Summit. This is us doing a study, a feasibility study of lane repurposing, and then now rolling that back out to the community that uses it every day. And let's see what they say and what their thoughts are. And we didn't want that to just sit on a shelf somewhere. So Caitlin and our Public Works team has taken that on. That's 6:30 to 7:30 at Vickery Resource Center on May 16th at 2130 Summit Boulevard. Update on the street sweeper naming contest. I believe we're over 6,000 votes. It's been great feedback, and that's the public voting is open. We'll do one more push. Public voting is open until tomorrow, May 3rd at 5 p.m. for the 12 finalists. So, make sure you get your votes in, cityofpensacola.com, or of course it's on our social media as well. And then last update, and then happy to take your questions, is the welcome sign contest. Of course, that closed. And we have had our committee has had its first meeting, and I believe has narrowed it down to a handful of finalists, but still more to come. We have not necessarily committed previous to this that we would do any kind of vote on a top two or top three. We wanted the committee to get their hands on this, and if there was clearly one thing that was better than the rest, that we could choose that. So we didn't limit ourselves on how we're going to proceed from here. But what I'll say is that we did get submissions. Our committee has met, and I'll have a more robust update for you on that next week. But it is closed. The process is ongoing, and we'll continue to keep you updated. So. With that, happy to take your questions. Yeah.
We got some comments from readers over the weekend. They parked downtown on Sunday and got tickets on Sunday. Is that a new policy for the city to enforcing parking on Sundays even though it's free, or what's?
Well, there's a couple different. There's two different options based on, obviously I would have to know the specific complaint or where the ticket was located, because it could be geographic, it could be other things. What I'd say is, we're certainly going to improve our communication to the rules. In a couple of these instances, we did have a miscommunication on our side down by the port. Over the weekend, where by the letter of no one, and certainly in parking enforcement, hasn't been following what the rule is. We didn't do a good enough job communicating what that rule, or making an exception when we had an event down there, that kind of stuff. So some of that parking over by Plaza de Luna is enforced past 7 p.m. And that's what the parking enforcement did. That was a miscommunication on our part, so we're working with everyone who's had a ticket down there to get that corrected. Now, we've also had some discussion, and I've received some emails about parking on Sundays around Palafox Street, around churches. Obviously, there were some folks very vocal about that. Now, those violations are folks not parking in a parking space, blocking a driveway, or parking the wrong side of the street. There is so I want to clarify, no ticket has been issued about someone parking in a legal parking space. It's just, and as I would say, I think that's, although, again, we followed what the rules were. Those are the rules. I try to take I'm imperfect at it, clearly, but I try to take pride in playing offense and communication, and that's something we could have played better offense and communication on, is to say, hey, guys, we see this as a problem down in this area starting May 1st, starting June 1st, we'll write warnings until then or something like that. So we are reacting to that, and I think we had moved to warnings there for a couple of weeks because, and again, no, we are enforcing exactly how the rules allow us to enforce. but perhaps we could have done a better job of rolling that out and explaining that if somebody's been doing something, even if it's technically against the rules, if they've been doing something unbeknownst to them that isn't correct, that we could probably, I certainly could have done a better job of making sure, getting out there and communicating it. So I just want to illustrate that clear line of saying that, the tickets issued up there would be a ticket today, they'd be one yesterday, they'd be one tomorrow. But, doing a better job communicating when so many people are down there in that area at the same time, that's certainly something that, we're working on and working through to make sure that we're communicating better.
Any update on the Malcolm Young generator?
I just got the update 2 minutes before I walked up here that we have received the report, the full structural assessment. So obviously I have not seen it. I don't think our administration has seen it yet. Maybe some of the folks in Public Works, but our expectation at this point, knowing again the preliminary kind of opinion that we got, that I shared with you guys last week, I believe, without knowing what the results are, if we assume that they're going to go down that direction, I think, certainly our next conversation is going to be with the leaseholder, and we're going to say, here's whatever it says, we're going to say, here's what the structural assessment said. You are the leaseholder in this building. Certainly, we want to make sure that, depending on what they want to do, I mean, we might be talking about repairs in the millions. I don't know, and we'll find out. But we want to give them that opportunity. They do have the lease on it. We want to give them an opportunity to sit down with them, see what their desire is, see what they want to do. We're not going to come rush in and make our own changes there, or go in and demolish the building because of just this report. This is something that I want to make sure that we take care with and respect the person that signed the lease a couple years ago and have that conversation with them. So again, can't give you exactly what it says, and that obviously what it says is going to determine how that conversation goes. But regardless of what this says, the next step will be we'll meet with Lighthouse Christian, go over that report, give them the highlights, and kind of say, and just work with them and say what next.
It seems pretty extensive damage from what you told us last week.
Yeah, I mean and when someone says you can't have people in there, I mean, not only is that, as I said, I give credit to our team that saw something and said something. I mean, who's to know that something doesn't fall in today or tomorrow or during a PE class next week? I mean, it's just not worth, and that's why. And certainly, understandably, the leaseholder was a little frustrated with it being so abrupt. I totally understand, and as I think they understood, I explained to them, I would rather you be a little upset with me than have to call you because someone got hurt or killed in your building, in our building. So, that's one of those frustrations I don't want on anybody, but I'm certainly willing to take. So I appreciate our team seeing that, saying something about it, and allowing us to take the proper steps forward. So I fully acknowledge the inconvenience it is. You're operating a school. It's the end of the school year. Totally can sympathize with that. And we have our Parks and Rec team that's been working diligently with the school to find them space and all of those things. And some of our community partners, Lakeview, has helped us a little bit with that, I know, in trying to help them find space. So yeah, I think given the circumstances, we're doing everything that we can. And the next step will be, let's read this report, see what it says, and then see what they want to do next. Yeah, as I explained, I said, look, regardless of what our building is, whether we were leasing the old train station, Malcolm Young, at the end of the day, if something happens to somebody in there, it's not your building, it's our building, and that's the stance I took is, we don't get to say, if somebody got hurt in there in an old building, we don't get to say, well, don't worry about it because we lease that building. It's ours. I mean, we have to take, even if people are responsible for maintenance, which we have many leases where there's certain responsibilities for maintenance, there was in this, we can't take that for granted. If that maintenance isn't happening, or we're not fully clear on the direction of making sure that it's safe for people, then those are just tough decisions that you have to make. I mean, and we would do 100 times out of 100. No, Jim, go ahead.
I was just going to follow up on that. You got the Malcolm Young Gym, and the Hawkshaw Memorial, Bay Bluffs Park, and I know you're in the middle of the budget process. what changes are we gonna see to the budget this month that will be prioritizing kind of years of deferred maintenance on all these city facilities?
Yeah, what I hope is between now and October 1st, we have a very crystal clear assessment of what we have, an inventory of what we have, which obviously we know that, but what we have, what's in good condition. Bayview Community Center is probably okay. It's been built pretty recently. Malcolm Young, we should assume, isn't okay. So I think between our job and between now and the start of the new budget is to make a clear assessment on what needs help, what might need help in the future, and we've got to start investing in that. I mean, we got to start investing in the maintenance of what we have. So in what form that is, I think there could be some changes in some maintenance responsibility. We might be moving things between Public Works and Parks and Rec on right-of-ways. So obviously that we're in that process now. None of that is final, but we're looking at a wide spectrum of things, from clarity on assignment of who's in charge of maintenance of what, and having a policy, a year 1, year 2, year 3 of where we're really budgeting and making sure that we're anticipating the needs of the city. And right now we're in a position where we are reactionarily, choosing maintenance. We didn't say we didn't have Malcolm Young scheduled, we didn't have Bay Bluff scheduled, we didn't have City Hall scheduled, we didn't have Fire Station 4 scheduled. Though some things are unforeseen, of course. I mean, you can't nail it, but I know we can certainly do a better job, and our team's already working on doing a better job of making sure that we have as much clarity as we can to predict these things in the future. But I'm going to be committed to the maintenance of, before we get. I'm not saying we aren't going to have new things. We're open to new things today, but we've got to take a higher priority in the pie chart of our investment in community centers and in parks. Is we're going to see a greater and greater share of that pie to be towards maintaining the things and beautifying the things that we have. I think we've got a lot of great assets. We've got more park acreage than a city our size would have. We've got more community centers than a city our size would normally have. So let's accentuate those. Let's reinforce the value of those. We don't need to do necessarily always another new thing. How do we take care of and make sure that the citizens are proud of the things that we do have? And so I can't give you a clear answer on X $100,000 more in maintenance, but those are the conversations that we're in right now. So it'll be both a financial one and a clarity of role one, to say who's in charge of what, and which person is in charge of these parks, and we'll have clarity on that moving forward. Yeah, Rick, go ahead.
Operation Brownsville.
Yeah.
Completed a week. BPD, 1 shoplifting arrest in the area. Last night it was a community meeting. 9 people showed up. Lumen May and I were 2 of them. What half the district that's been mapped out is in the city. What's the city doing to communicate? Do the citizens even know there's an Operation Brownsville?
Obviously can't speak for what the citizens know or don't know, but
You can't speak to what y'all are doing to tell them.
Sure. Yeah, I get that. Here's what I know now. We looked at this first week, year over year, 200 calls for service last year, 233 this week. So when you compare, not a distinct change. We had 2 arrests yesterday, so we'll get you information on that. We had a traffic stop that resulted in 1 arrest of an outstanding sheriff's office warrant. And that was yesterday afternoon. And then we made an additional arrest on, it was a traffic stop, but it was possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, intent to distribute, tampering, destroying evidence, and some other charges. So those 2 arrests I know from the update I got as of this morning, what took place with our PPD officers. And obviously, I know it sounds evasive, but there's things that we're working on too that we can't, kind of defeats the purpose. Operation anywhere, it defeats the purpose if we're divulging everything that we're doing to the media. So there's certainly things that I don't know about that I'm not briefed on that we're working on that with the sheriff's department. So, I think at the end of the day, we all want to see improvement. I mentioned to you last week, and that comes in a lot of forms. It comes in law enforcement. which I can speak to that certainly we have been more attentive about and that we are specific about some of those efforts alongside the Sheriff's Department. But some of that is in, community development and community building as well. So, I would have to have Chief Randall and his team speak to how they're getting the word out or how they're collaborating with the Sheriff's Department. But that's the information I can give you on the PPD side in terms of what the results of that first
Well,
meeting were.
is code enforcement doing, we hear that supposedly code enforcement's working on the county side, is city code enforcement doing anything?
Yeah, I've got the details. I know there was a house, I believe it was on West Jackson, that code enforcement went out to yesterday, and that we're making progress on that should have certainly been is long overdue, is what I've heard. But I don't want to say what those exact details are, but we can get you that. I just got emailed that either yesterday or this morning. What I can tell you from that is code is out there. I know that they were out there in the last couple of days and took some action on a house that was dilapidating and abandoned. So we'll get you that address and all that stuff as well.
So you're happy with what's happening with Operation Brown?
Look, I'm happy with what I know that PPD's out there, and I know that they're. I mean, when you have an arrest of someone with a felony possessing a firearm, and how we got here, I believe, is around gun violence. So, look, I'm sure we'd love to all say we had 100 people, that were violating the law or that could potentially have a gun crime that we caught, or, I'm not sure that we went into this saying X number of people need to be arrested, or certainly those numbers haven't been shared with me, or that's not our discussion. We're just wanting to have a greater emphasis on what's happening out there, and as I said, but certainly
Do you think that's happening?
I can speak for Pensacola Police Department. I would say I've seen enough data and I've seen enough measurement in these specific areas to know that we are certainly taking an emphasis in this area as we said we would. I can't speak to every tactic that we're taking on and whether it is or isn't effective. I would have to let the police department do that. John.
Mayor, the city's had a solicitation out for engineering services during the early part of the spring here, and I believe it had closed in March, and it is related to the ability of city department heads to issue service orders without having to take individual project procurement items to council. Is that an accurate description of, and that all of this is being front-loaded into the current budget you're working on? Mm-hmm. So there'll be no need to ask city council to fund, say, a $500,000 piece of some CRA project. Is that accurate, the way I described it?
I would hesitate to speak to every scenario of can you use CRA, can you not, or, with this. But what I'll tell you is my understanding certainly is this is not only customary for the city, but customary for other municipalities for us to be nimble enough. What it is ultimately this is a collection of we check your qualifications, make sure you put in an application, all of that kind of stuff. You have a deadline to get that in, and that's a collection of qualified folks. We use that in many ways. We use that in real estate. Same thing. We don't just randomly pick a real estate, someone on a real estate list out of the phone book if we were to have to outsource and hire someone. So that's what allows us to not have to, on every project, no matter how small, go into a prolonged, months-long process for a $10,000 design on something. So yes, it is big and small, and details on Amy Toodles in the back can certainly give details on how, all the nuances of it. I don't want to speak out of turn on what you can or can't do with it, but I can get you with Amy, or we can get you a clear update on it. But at the end of the day, this is not something new. This is something that my understanding. I mean, certainly this was not a conversation that when I started that we would be changing pace. Now, is that fair to say? Or Amy will just come on up and she'll give you your answer.
Well, Mayor, the reason this has come up from several people with us is that in the past, there's been some criticism the council has nitpicked some of these less than $1 million pieces, particularly from the CRA, and that has stalled everything out, slowed it down. That this, as they've told us, is a move toward more efficiency.
Yeah.
That's, the directors will have it already allocated
Right.
in their budget. They can issue a service order. The public never sees the details of the service order, and therefore efficiency is gained, but transparency is lost.
Okay.
That-
Well, I'll
that's
answer
what
that,
the-
but I'll let Amy speak to the first question, since you're up here, just on that process.
Sure. So it's yes and no. So we have had for many years continuing services contracts with consultant design engineers. So whenever we have projects that are allocated by the council, they've already dedicated the funding source. If we've already dedicated the funding source, then those are things that if it's not requiring federal dollars or certain aspects, then we can go ahead and use those particular engineering firms that are on our competitively procured contracts to be able to do those services for us. There's still certain contracts and certain dollar thresholds that we still have to go out and solicit engineering firms to be able to do the projects, especially with DOT. Sometimes with DOT, with our local agency program projects, we have to go out and competitively procure those in a different manner to be able to procure their services. So it's kind of a yes and no. If the funding is something that's already been allocated by the council, so for instance, like Graffiti Bridge, council allocated the funding for that source, for that project last Thursday. So we'll use our continuing services contract to be able to get an engineering firm on to do the design for us.
So those projects that don't meet the threshold, how would the public have any visibility into what the service orders consist of?
Because it's going to go out on the website through the purchasing website, and it'll be solicited and advertised, and the scope of the services and everything is out there on our public-facing purchasing website. Everything that we do out there is on that website. That is for transparency, so anybody can see what the scope is of the project.
And I believe the open application, Amy, was for the continuing service, for engineering was, like you said, has just closed. So in other words, if there was someone out there, an engineering company out there, everyone's had the opportunity to put in for that. Yeah, so that closed a few weeks ago.
Oh, it was quite a while.
Yeah.
Are you talking about for the
For engineering.
continuing services?
Yeah.
That was several months ago, and so we chose 8 different firms, and I think I've finished the final contracting with all but maybe 1 or 2 of the firms. So we're still working out their legal, our legal, in the terms of the contract. But for the most part, that was done many months ago.
All right. What else?
You'll be on Station 4?
Yes, we are. Believe we got or we're getting close to getting an estimate on remediation. The good news was it sounds like we're in a position that and remember, remediation is always a big if, because you open a wall and what do you find and those kinds of things, right? So this is not as cut and dry as saying you're going to build this at this price. So we do think that we're going to move forward. One of the hesitations I had was if we thought that the remediation and repair of a building that's already, I think, was put into service in 1995, although we expect them to have about a 50-year life, if that building was, if we were going to start spending a significant portion of a replacement on remediation of an old building, that certainly we would want to be mindful of the taxpayer dollar and say, let's not throw 30% of the price of a new fire station into an old fire station. I would say right now what we do know is we feel pretty confident that that is not the case, that we will be able to start. The first step would be the remediation, and that's the removal, that's drywall, things like that. There's other considerations that we have there. The roof, the AC unit, there's some other things that could have a larger ticket on those. We don't have as much information on that yet. But I would say at least the step one of the remediation looks to be within control, and that's something that, from a timing standpoint also, that was the other, not just the dollars and cents, but how long would we be offline without Station 4 if we were remediating versus how long hypothetically, we'd be offline if we were to go into a whole process of having to pursue something new and not only come up with the funding, but also how long we would be without a station. So, I would say we're not committed to this yet. We have not, my understanding, we haven't moved forward. We were just having this conversation yesterday, but the first information I was able to get from our finance department looks like the direction we'll go is we'll start with that remediation, the drywall, the things like that, take that out, replace, and then we'll continue to assess the AC unit, the roof, the things like that, the other things that will need to take place to make sure. And what we want to do is, let's say whether we only do the first part and that's all we need, or we do all three, what we want to make sure of is that we're going to, when we make that significant six-figure type investment, potentially high six-figure if you include a roof, that we would want to make sure that at that point we still have a long life in the building, right? We don't want to make all those repairs and then be right back where we were in 3 or 4 years, you know. So those are the assessments we're making, kind of option A, option B, but it sounds like we're going to go ahead and move forward at this point, barring something unforeseen, that we're going to move ahead with the remediation.
Mayor,
Yep.
the city is pursuing a strategic plan.
Mm-hmm.
Will this dashboard, quality of life dashboard, and the update to the transition plan, will that inform the strategic plan? Or is the cart in front of the horse, or is the cart at the right place here?
Yeah, no, I think it's at the right place. Look, a strategic plan, a citywide strategic plan is a robust document that not only has feedback from the mayor or the administration, it's got feedback from the council, the citizens. What do we want this city to be? You know, and I think that's a different question than the mayoral transition team might say, hey, mayor, here are some ideas that we have for the city. I think that a citywide strategic plan is a much more robust vision for where we're going, what we invest in, what's important to us as citizens. Where I would say if you're comparing those two things, I look at the transition report as a little more tactical, you know, kind of more of a SWOT analysis within these particular departments.
How would you separate the aspirational from the need to do in the transition plan if you don't have the master, I mean, in your transition deal? It's sort of, you would have to have the grand vision. What do we want to be? How do we want to be it?
Yeah.
Before you could assess the tactics. Right?
Well, look, if you're asking me if it would be nice if we had a new strategic plan right before our mayor transition team, of course, that would be great. I mean, that we would have this larger guiding document of which anybody on the transition team would have been able to kind of work off of and say, hey, I've heard, now that I see that this is the direction of the entire city and the community, you know, that can affect what you know, buckets you have with the transition report and all that. So I do see those as two different things, but also understand, you know, strategic plan, this process is not going to be a short one. I mean, this isn't something that we're going to have in our hand in 6 months. Our first, our RFP that's out for the strategic plan is I mean, that's really just step one, you know, and there's going to be an assessment of what we do have. Obviously, so many community conversations around that. So, you know, that's something that's going to take a long time. So even if you're asking in an ideal world, would it be nice to have a transition report that is based off of a strategic plan? Absolutely. We don't have that luxury. So we're not going to paralyze ourselves over, you know, for 2-3 years of action. We'll do the best we can without the citywide strategic plan, and certainly we'll start to mold those things together once we have that information.
Money are you budgeting for a strategic plan?
I believe we have $300,000 in the budget and carry forward, if I remember correct. That's what we had allocated, and you know, we think that certainly gets us down the road, and that's the process we're in right now. We'll see, you know, what the cost is.
Do you have a target date when you'd like to see this kick off?
Not yet, only because I think this first step is going to be, we're going to hear from the professionals that help us put something like this together. They're going to know certainly way better than I'm going to know about making sure that we have a fair amount of time on community engagement and all those things. So I would hate to, if I gave you a date right now, I'd just be guessing. I think we would want, once we select, or once we at minimum start to have these interviews and see these proposals from folks to work with us on our strategic plan, I think from that point forward, we'll have a much clearer picture of how long we think this process will take.
Do you plan to outsource this strategic plan?
I do.
Management, guidance of it, or keep it in-house?
Certainly, the construction, the community engagement, all the things that it takes to have a finished plan. That we will certainly do that. I don't know. I may insource. This is speculating 2 years from now potentially, so just bear with me. But I think if I had that plan right now, we may, depending on what it calls for and the kind of action it's going to require, I will probably have someone who wakes up every day making sure. Actually got to visit Henderson, Nevada. I heard Michelle Lewing on the radio the other day. That's how I met with everybody, the mayor and all the administration in Henderson, Nevada, and they. That was one of the things that they did. That was one of the inspiration points of doing this. Is they have a great strategic plan, and not only that, they have someone that ultimately kind of comes into meetings and says, hey, let's make sure I kind of say head of alignment, but it's kind of like, hey, you've got the strategic plan. Let's make sure that these actions that we're taking are following what the community wants. So there's that little layer of accountability. I thought that was really interesting, and so they've been a good little, they got desert and we've got beach, but it was a good little benchmark for us to look at what they did with the report and how they continue to have it sustain and live on. Anything else?
Any update on
Amtrak, not yet. I badger Erica in our office enough to find out if we got an email back from the Federal Rail Administration. So, just waiting. The next update will be a yes or a no on if we get the $500,000 corridor ID grant. And if the answer is no, an update I can give you. If the answer is no, we do intend. It's open for several years, so we would come back next year. And really, frankly, with an even more robust application, working alongside FDOT and all that. And FDOT has been great so far, but given the timing of starting this administration and when we did it, we probably didn't have as much, runway. We still feel really good about where we are. And again, huge kudos to our administration, Erica, Joelle Holland, who, our grant writer who's spending nights and weekends getting that thing done. Tons of people were in play to get it where it is. So don't take that as I think we turned in something half-hearted. I'm very, very proud of what we turned in. But with time always comes a little more luxury of putting our best foot forward. So fingers crossed, we'll find out if we get that $500,000, and the more important part of that being that we're on the radar of the Federal Rail Administration as somewhere that they like to see expanded service. That's really more than the $500,000. That's the value, so fingers crossed, and we should. I don't know that they gave us a hard and fast day that we would find out, but we'll certainly more to come. We'll let you know as soon as we know. All right, thanks guys, appreciate it.